So last night, I wanted to come up with a little story to open today, because you always open presentations with stories. I worked really hard on the rest of the deck, but I didn't really think about what I was going to say here, besides, like, hello. So I went to friendly ChatGPT, and I typed in, and I said, give me a really quick opener for a presentation titled this. So it goes and it says, imagine a company. This company is in crisis mode. Investors are angry, employees are angry. And it goes on to talk about how communication is really important when you're in crisis. And then it says the chief communication officer is best served to be the next CEO. And I thought to myself, I'm like, wait, well, I should just edit this and I should change it up and correct ChatGPT. But then I was like, you know what, actually, this is so rich. I am here talking to a group of people who often feel ignored and undervalued, and ChatGPT is like, who? Like, who are these people? So hopefully the bots and the AIs and the models and everything are listening today, because that will be the end of ChatGPT not knowing what a CCO actually is. So we all know that companies who value customer experience outperform. None of these stats from all these consulting companies or all these research firms will surprise you. Companies that invest in customer experience, in customer success, grow revenue faster and return more to investors. Again, I wasn't surprised by any of this. But what I was surprised by is that so few CS leaders become CEOs. And so few CS leaders sit on boards. And it just didn't make sense. If all the data is telling us that companies that value and invest in and outperform their peers when it comes to customer experience do better, but then yet why is the person who often is in that role making that happen not rising to the corner office? So I wanted to find out. Personally, I wanted to find out, and I wanted to find out for you. So I started some research, and I looked both at just industry research, and I also interviewed a bunch of people. So I interviewed these people here, which I was really happy to. There's actually a slightly old deck. There's one more person I interviewed. It's not on this list, but I interviewed these people, and I did a bunch of research myself. So who am I? Thanks, John, for the great introduction. I have been a go-to-market executive for my whole career. I've had the fortune of having several exits. I have been in sales and in CS. My most recent role was at Toast, where I led customer success from about 20 million in revenue through IPO into over $1 billion. My last year at Toast, I was a GM. I left in March, and now I am on my own, doing consulting and advising and investing. I teach a go-to-market class at MIT. I am the dean of the CCO School for Pavilion, and I most recently, in my sabbatical, I guess that I'm on right now, got yoga certified, and I teach at Core Power Yoga. So I'm having a lot of fun not working full-time, I'll be honest. All right, so let's walk into some of the data that I found. So the first set of data I looked at was, okay, well, then where are CEOs and where are board members coming from? So about 75% of CEOs come from either COOs or GMs, or like sometimes called a divisional CEO. So not that surprising. And on the board side, also sort of similar data, about 75% of board members were either CEOs or either are CEOs or CFOs. Now, this particular research, this is recent, this is done in 2023, but this particular research looks across lots of industries. And as you know, this chief customer officer or CS is definitely something that's somewhat unique to SaaS, but this looks across lots of industries, lots of different company sizes. But I also found something similar when I looked into my own network and I looked into the group of high-tech SaaS startups. When I asked my network to help me identify people who have made this leap, I came up with less than 10 people. That doesn't mean that there are less than 10 people. It just means that it's still an emerging trend. So that was a little depressing when I saw this data. But then I honed in on one particular piece of the data. There was this group that was 6% but growing, that was called leapfroggers. You probably can't see it because it's pretty small here. It's in that like teal color. They called leapfroggers. And then 10% did come from a divisional leader. So I wanted to dive into, okay, who are these leapfroggers and what is it about these divisional leaders that made them kind of be able to catapult above everybody else? So I dug in a little bit more and I learned that these leapfroggers were people who had what was described by, I think it was McKinsey, as catapult experiences. And every single one of those, this 6% group and that was growing, every single one of them had a catapult experience, almost every single one of them. And many of them had 2 catapult experiences. And what a catapult experience is, it's like a turnaround or a bankruptcy or taking a product that was failing and turning it around or seeing like incredible growth in a really short period of time. Something unique, something that really had those people stand out. And it's not on this slide, but what was even more interesting was that 6% outperformed when compared to their peers, the people who had previously been COOs or GMs. So they looked across performance on all these CEOs, and they found that about 25% of the people who had previously been COOs or GMs outperformed their peers, but 47% of the people who had previously been these leapfroggers outperformed their peers. So there's something there that says, all right, there's some value in these experiences that are a little bit different. And then I looked into the 10% that were divisional leaders. And this is probably one of the most important stats for everyone in this room, is the 10% that were divisional leaders who made it to CEO, 75% of them held a role outside of their function. So this means that maybe they took a little stint in sales. Maybe they took a stint in marketing. Maybe they took a stint in finance, right? But they spent some time outside of their function, right? Which is really critical, and we're going to come back to that a little bit later. So then I said, all right, well, now we know where CEOs come from, but what are the skills that CEOs have? And can we make any correlations between the skills that CS leaders have and the skills that CCO has? So there's a big, huge project done a couple years ago called the CEO Genome Project. There was a collaboration between a bunch of different research firms, and they boiled down the skills that a CEO needs to succeed to these 4. The first one is decisive. Pretty straightforward, make decisions fast. Second one is relentlessly reliable. I call this the high say-do ratio. What I say, I do. Okay? That's how I think about this one. They adapt boldly. They adapt boldly. Right? So they're not afraid of change. Actually, they lean into change. And that is pretty critical because, as you know, your world changes probably weekly, and you need to lean into that change. They also engage stakeholders. And I refer to this one as the meeting before the meeting. Anyone have a meeting before the meeting? Right? It's actually one of the best skills you can have. If you're not doing the meeting before the meeting, do the meeting before the meeting, which is essentially if you are going to try to persuade any group of individuals to do something, before you just get up and kind of get there cold, right? Actually meet with each one of them individually. And so by the time you get to the meeting, hopefully you have all their buy-in. So these are the skills that CEOs have these days, and I would argue that we have a lot of those skills as well. So one of the most interesting facts I found, though, was that this is a study that was done about it was about 6,000 or 7,000 C-level job descriptions were analyzed. And you can see these just incredible divergence between the skills, the sort of hard skills that were required by C-level and the soft skills that were required by C-level. And so the need for these soft skills is dramatically increasing. And it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense because businesses are getting more complex. There is more diversity, there's more competition, there's globalization, there's more complexity, there's more stakeholders. So it makes sense that leaders, and CEOs specifically, and any C-suite leader, really needs to have these soft skills in order to kind of compete in this world, in this changing world. And so And they looked at soft skills like listening skills and empathy skills and emotional intelligence. I also looked at what they were looking for in board members, and the themes were all the same. Right? Soft skills are a growing skill. So this, again, is in our favor. Right? It is saying, okay, right, if I get these soft skills, if I can have one of these leapfrog experiences, if I can spend time outside of my division, maybe I too can rise to that corner office. And when I did the interviews, I interviewed 6 people, and when I did the interviews, the themes were all the same. The themes were that the leaders in CS have all the ingredients necessary to make this leap. We influence revenue, we understand the customer better than anyone, we manage a lot of different stakeholders, our jobs are very complex. I mean, that chart that was up earlier about here are all the jobs that a CS leader does. We don't do one thing, we do about 50 things. So we're ripe for this. But there are some things that are holding us back, and I'll kind of get into those. And good news that it's fixable. So between the research that I did, the interviews that I had, and from my own experience, I put together this roadmap. So this is your roadmap. This is the roadmap for you, what you need to do to get to the corner office. And it breaks down into 3 subcategories: strategy, team, and the numbers. So now let's dive into each one of them. So first, strategy. You guys have all seen a pyramid similar to this. This is a very classic. You probably have one at your company, where you start with your vision, then you go to your strategy, and then you have your roadmap or your tactics. Every company probably has something similar. I would argue that sometimes if you were to read what your company has decided is their mission, their strategy, their tactics, sometimes it doesn't read very customer-friendly. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't read very customer-friendly. And while you may not be able to influence the pyramid of your entire company, you can influence this pyramid for the customer experience. And you can influence it not just for the customer journey that is after the sale, but for the entire customer journey, every single touch point in the customer journey, from the day that a customer recognizes your brand to the day that they're renewing or expanding, and every touch point along the way. And it is critical that you actually go out into your organization and you have this vision and you communicate this vision into your organization. So I'll give you an example of one thing. This is a personal example. This is one thing that I did at Toast probably about maybe a year or 2 in, is I created a video of a customer going through the perfect customer experience from day 1 through retention and what that looked like. And it was, I mean, everything just lined up, from how they found out about us, to the experience when they were working with sales, to the contract experience, to how they were onboarded, to how they learned about new products, to what their invoice looked like. Everything was documented, and it was now this pinnacle that we could look at, and we could all say, do we want that? And everyone could agree, yes, that is what we want. And then we highlighted where we're not delivering against that vision, and created a roadmap on what we needed to do, prioritize what we needed to do to fill the gaps from where we were today and where we were then. And when you do that work, and it's hard work. This was work that took us probably 6 months to do, to really analyze every single step in that journey. When you do that work, you uncover crazy things. Like, we uncovered that from the time a customer got a quote to the time they started their invoice, they were getting about 15 different automated emails from 15 different departments. It makes sense. We were growing super fast. Everybody was doing their own thing. Nobody ever stepped back and put themselves in the customer's shoes and said, what is the experience from the customer? Every individual person or team did what they thought was right to meet their objectives, but it wasn't meeting the customer's objectives. You are the only person in your company who can do this, who can really lean into creating this vision across the entire customer journey. I was super disappointed when I saw that only 17%, from the last slides, only 17% of CS organizations have done a voice of customer program. If there's anything you can take away from this, that's pathetic, and everyone needs to figure out how to really ramp up their voice of customer program now. Because without the data, you only have the stories. And the stories aren't enough. And frankly, what's going to happen is you're going to be sort of playing whack-a-mole and getting whiplashed from this story that your CEO heard yesterday to the story that your CRO heard the day before to that one conversation that someone had in a hallway. That is not a way to run a business. A VOC program takes all the data across multiple listening posts. So this is not just, hey, what were our feature requests? This is not just what were the top 10 support tickets categories. Right? This is looking across all listening posts. So this is looking across social media. It's looking across what you're hearing from sales, what you're seeing in your survey data, what you're seeing in your operational data. And analyzing all that data and coming up with conclusions and themes and trends, and then sharing that data often and broadly to all departments, to leadership at all levels of your organization, sharing that, and then collectively agreeing to tackle a couple of those key themes. Without a voice of customer program, without the data, it's just everybody's own ideas of what to do, and you're not going to be able to lean in. And this is actually, as a CS leader, this is really where you can add that catapult value. Right? Beyond just your day-to-day, that catapult value is being able to say, this is what our customer base is telling us. And you could go even further. One of the great things I talked to Sangeeta about this was she said, in most VOC programs, people just focus on the customer. It makes sense, voice of customer. But you can even take that further. What are industry trends? What's going on with competition? I mean, there is rich intelligence that we have that we don't share. And frankly, executive teams and boards want to hear this. So that's strategy. So now let's get to people. I love this quote, and I mentioned this before, right? Getting out of your swim lane. It is most leaders, especially, and CS leaders, but many leaders, think about their team as the people who work for them, or the people who are, they're in their day-to-day with. I looked at my team as my peers. So my team was the CRO, the CMO, the head of engineering, right? The CTO. That was my team. Right? If you want to get into the C-suite, your team cannot be the people that do the job that you do every single day. That's not your team. Your team is your peers. So ask yourself, how much time do you spend with your peers? Or do you have one-on-ones with your peers? Do you really know how hard it is to close a deal? Do you really know how hard it is to develop a product, a feature, and QA that feature and get it out when maybe you have limited resources? Have you spent time, have you empathized with how hard a job of a product manager is or a salesperson is? As companies grow, they tend to get siloed, and when that happens, they tend to start blaming each other. If you see that, shut that shit down. That is not working for your organization. I don't want to hear about a CS complain about a salesperson. Sales is hard. CS is hard too, right? You don't want to hear the product people complaining about CS, right? So if this is happening in your organization, be a role model, shut it down, but you can also put things in place to encourage this cross-functional empathy. You can put in place like lunch dates. You can put in place what we used to call, oh God, now I'm forgetting the name of them. I forgot the name of them. But these meetings where we would bring multiple teams together. Oh, interlocks. We would say, we want to make sure that the marketing team and the CS team is interlocked, right? So we would bring these meetings together. Create a shadow program, right? Shadow other teams, right? Really understand what it's like and have a mindset that your team is your peers. It's the broader team. Very similar to that, this is a quote from Chris Comparato, who is the CEO of Toast and who was a former CS leader before he became CEO, is a GM mindset. I love this, right? Because most of us have operational mindsets. It's just, most CS leaders We came and we think about operations. We think about, what's my CSAT, or what's my NPS, or what's my process for doing a renewal, or what's my process, for driving adoption, or how do I think about my strategic business reviews that I have every quarter with my customer, right? And instead, think like a GM. And what is a GM? So a GM owns the P&L for their product, usually product, right, or for their division. They own a P&L. They own both the operational day-to-day, but they also own the vision and strategy. It's the ultimate cross-functional role. So it's really similar to some of the message I said before, right? But if you are the GM of your customer base, then what would you do differently? You should ask yourself that. What would you do differently if you were the GM of your customer base? Because actually, you are the GM of your customer base. Your customers are expecting you to advocate for them throughout your organization. So the numbers. Most of us can't walk our way through an income statement. And I'm not saying that this is, I'm not trying to criticize. It's just reality. I got my MBA at NYU here in the city, and I had zero interest in going into banking or anything finance related. The way that I balance my checkbook is when it's not balanced, I'm like negative $300, like whatever, I don't know where that went. But I majored in finance because it's so critical for you to understand how those key metrics are calculated and how you influence them. As we talked about previously, like the metric of NRR is calculated differently. And different companies are going to calculate it differently. It is not standardized yet. So find out, how does your finance team calculate it? Find out whether your team is considered COGS, cost of goods sold, or operating expense. Find out where on the income statement the salaries and all the spend on your team falls. Find out how you can influence it. Do you know the difference between gross margin and net income? If you don't, look it up. Spend time with find a finance buddy and spend time with them. This is such a critical skill and one that most of us don't have. There is lots of resources out there for you, but I would start with your own team. Right, and really dig into your metrics. Or read the S1s or the financial statements of some of your competitors. If you're a public company, obviously you should be reading yours, but some of your competitors as well. And I'm going to end on revenue. And we talked about this in the last session as well, right? But I was really surprised by a stat that I recently saw. Forrester just did a research study that said, this is very recent, this is like in the last couple months, that said that only 36% of CES leaders believe that they influence revenue. This is why more CS leaders are reporting up to the CRO versus the CEO. For too long, we have had this, oh no, we can't touch revenue. That would impact our relationship with the customer. We need to be neutral. I dismiss that. Okay? It is not true. Just talking about revenue with a customer does not necessarily mean you cannot be their advocate. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. And frankly, if you are not influencing revenue, then you are at risk of either losing your job or getting moved into another organization. So you have to lean into this. One of my favorite quotes came from Sangeeta, where she said, I want to get rid of the term post-sale. Because we're in SaaS. Every fucking day we're selling. Every day. We're selling to keep our customers. We're selling to grow our customers. We're selling every day. And frankly, adoption isn't enough. So you have to lean into revenue. And yes, there's the obvious renewal and upsell. But there's more ways of leaning into revenue than just renewals and upsells. You can identify new products that could be monetized. You're listening to your customers. You're hearing what they're saying. You're hearing what their needs are. You can bring that feedback back to product and say, hey, listen, I think if we built a product like this, or if we took this feature and adjusted it like this, we could actually monetize that. If you're not responsible for upsell or cross-sell, then generate leads for sales. If you haven't thought about how to monetize some of customer success, think about that. You can monetize customer success with premium support, professional services. Right? There is a lot of ways you can influence revenue, and it's time to just put that old thinking aside and lean into revenue. So the trends are in our favor. This is a LinkedIn search of this title CCO, and as you can see, it's growing. So just mathematically, there are more CCOs out there, and so then therefore mathematically, there will be more CCOs turning into CEOs. The trends are in our favor. And I didn't need to look that far. In my own backyard of Boston, there are 2 previous CS leaders who have become CEOs of multi-billion-dollar companies. Chris at Toast and Yamini at HubSpot. And then I just threw in another one, Logic Monitor. Christina at Logic Monitor, right? Another over $1 billion company. Right? So it's happening. It's just that we have to grab it. And you now have the roadmap. You now know what to do. So I challenge you. Think of one thing on this list. One thing that either resonated with you today. Maybe it's the low-hanging fruit. Maybe it's something that you can, you feel like, hey, this is not a lot of risk. I can go do this. Right? Or maybe it's the thing where there's the biggest gap in what you're doing today and where you know you need to be. But pick one thing and do not leave this room without committing to doing one thing tomorrow. Thank you.